Okay, class, so what you're seeing here is the document that I posted for you and asked you to review the skeletal muscle anatomy before we launch into the muscle physiology. So at any rate, let me go over this document with you. I want to go ahead and begin with the muscle cell or fiber itself and work out from there. So what you have here, this whole round, rod-shaped structure is a muscle cell or fiber. So you can call, muscle cells are kind of unusual, so they can be referred to as cells or they can be called fibers. So those words will be used interchangeably. But these muscle cells in skeletal muscle, they are long cylindrical cells. So this is a single muscle cell, that would be a muscle cell, that would be a muscle cell. So these muscle cells are bundled together into structures called fascicles. So a fascicle is a bundle of muscle cells or muscle fibers. So that whole thing's a fascicle, making that a muscle cell, that a muscle cell, that a muscle cell, etc. Now, when you look at the muscle cell itself, it is enclosed with a plasma membrane, but we don't call it a plasma membrane here. It has another name. We call it the sarcolemma. So the term sarcolemma is a term that we use for the muscle cell membrane. And it would be right inside here. I'm going to color it in purple. Right inside here, on the inside, and underneath that green layer, which we're going to identify in a moment. So sarc, I've underlined here. Sarc is a prefix that we use a lot with muscles and naming things. Sarc actually translates to flesh. So at any rate, the sarcolemma is a plasma membrane that encloses this muscle cell or muscle fiber. What you see sitting on the outside of that yellow cell right there, it sits on the outside of the muscle cell and it is called a myosatellite cell. So myo is another prefix we use a lot with muscle. Myo for muscle, satellite because that cell's kind of orbiting, if you will, around the outside of that cell, so it's a satellite. The myosatellite cells are involved in tissue repair. So when this cell is damaged in any way, that myosatellite cell can help repair that tissue. And we will talk a bit about that in lecture. Other items that you see here associated with the muscle cell, you see nuclei. And I've kind of colored over them, but if you look at your picture, there's one there, there's one there. So these are nuclei. The nuclei of a muscle cell, of a skeletal muscle cell, will sit out on the outside or on the periphery. So we call them peripheral nuclei. So they're sitting out on the edge of the cell, not in the center where you would kind of typically expect it to be. These cells are also multinucleated, meaning that there's more than one nucleus per cell. So you can see the nuclei tucked underneath that sarcolemma, scattered throughout your picture here. But so we have a multinucleated muscle cell. And then these guys are super important. The next ones we're going to talk about. In addition to myosatellite, in addition to nuclei, you also have these specialized organelles designed for contraction called myofibrils. So a myofibril is a rod-shaped organelle. So it's a long, rod-shaped or cylindrically shaped organelle where the contraction actually will occur. So these are specialized organelles designed for contraction, myofibrils. So all of those dots that you see in here, each one's a myofibril. So the sarcoplasm, and that's what we call, instead of saying cytoplasm, we call it sarcoplasm. The sarcoplasm in here is jam-packed full of these myofibrils. Now, we will find other organelles associated with this cell, so we will have mitochondria, we will have Golgi apparatus, we will have endoplasmic reticulum, etc. But you don't see them ever illustrated in the cell, but I do want to point out that they're there. We're also going to spend some time with an endoplasmic reticulum inside here called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which we will talk about or visit about in lecture. Okay, so those are some items associated with the muscle cell. The muscle cells themselves are then packaged in a bundle called a fascicle. So a fascicle is a bundle of muscle cells or fibers. So it's a bundle. Here we have all these muscle cells bundled together. That's a fascicle. So that's a fascicle. This would be a fascicle. This would be a fascicle. This would be a fascicle, etc. So you have all these fascicles packaged together to form the overall skeletal muscle. So this whole thing is the skeletal muscle. So what I want to do now is to identify what you see here numbered 1, 2, and 3. And these are the connective tissue elements associated with the skeletal muscle fiber. And I've written them down here, so I just want to make sure you can see them in your view. Number 1 is going to be the epimysium. The epimysium is the outermost connective tissue layer. So I've labeled it right here. They've kind of peeled it back in your picture. But that epimysium goes all the way around that entire muscle. So epi means above, so it's the outermost layer. And again, it is the connective tissue that encloses the entire muscle. Okay, then you have number 2, the connective tissue element that's in the middle, if you will, called the perimysium. The perimysium is a connective tissue layer that encloses each fascicle. So again, the perimysium encloses each fascicle. So I've outlined it in, I just want to scoot this up, make sure you can see it. So I've outlined it in red here, and I've outlined it in red here. So it's the middle connective tissue element that encloses each fascicle. And then finally you have the endomysium. So the endomysium, endo means inside. So at number 3, I've labeled the endomysium. The endomysium is the layer found on the outside of each muscle cell or muscle fiber. So I've again colored in green and colored in green here as well, the endomysium. So the endomysium is actually outside of the sarcolemma. So the sarcolemma is the cell membrane, but lying on the outside of the cell membrane is the endomysium. So if you're labeling them from inside to out, you have the endomysium on the inside, then you have the perimysium enclosing the fascicle, and then you have the epimysium that bundles the entire muscle itself. Now, what's next important anatomically is that those 3 connective tissue layers will run the entire length of the muscle cell and the fascicle and the muscle. They'll run the entire length of that organ and merge together at the end. And when they get to the end of the muscle, they will merge together to form the tendon. So the tendon is the connective tissue element that connects the skeletal muscle to a bone. So that's what connects muscle to bone, is the tendon. And again, it's formed as a union of the epimysium, the perimysium, and the endomysium. Okay, so that pretty much goes over that picture. We'll move to the next one in your document.